Welcome to Promote, Profit, Publish. I'm your host, Juliette Clark, and I'm really excited to have our second book release of the year on the podcast today. The author is an amazing human being, and her book, Finding Beauty in Your Broken Pieces, is going to be part of our book club starting February 15th. So if you haven't joined our book club, I encourage you to go over to Breakthrough Authors with an S, bookclub.com. It's an Amazon book club. It's free to join. And Samantha's book will be the featured book from February 15th until the end of February. So remember to go over there, join. It's free. And as we get going here too, we're going to be asking some questions inside the book club about what kinds of books you really like, and probably giving away some free books too. So if you're an avid reader, come on over. It's business books, professional books. We don't have much fiction there, which I'm a big fiction fan, so I belong to another book club over there that is sort of a whodunit place. But Breakthrough Authors Bookclub.com. So today's guest is Samantha Kaaua. And she is a professional keynote speaker, author, and esteemed marriage coach, recognized for her counterculture approach to transforming relationships. As the founder of The Gems with Samantha Kaaua and the creator of the Inner Mosaic method, she is a beacon for individuals yearning to break through negative family patterns and lay the foundations for loving and trusting relationships. So stay tuned for my interview with Samantha. Samantha, welcome. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So I'm really excited about your book. It is just so well written, such great information. How did you get into marriage and family counseling and everything that you do?
I like to say that I was like born into it.
Uh-oh.
I know, right? Well, my parents were divorced and separated before I was one. I was a product of divorce in my family. So my grandparents were divorced, both sides, aunties and uncles, and it was just really prevalent in my family. And so I had sworn to myself as a little girl that I would never get divorced. It wasn't like it wasn't the most horrible experience ever, but at the same time, I saw all these kids around me growing up with parents that were together. And so I said, okay, well, I'm not going to get divorced like the rest of my family. And especially if I have kids, right? And I declared that at such a young age. And then fast forward, marrying my high school sweetheart, 10 years into that relationship. And I found myself right where I swore I wouldn't be. And I was also in school at the time in my master's program to become a marriage and family therapist. Mainly because I have a lot of interest in supporting people and helping people, and therapy had been a default option because I was always the go-to person to talk about their problems, people's problems. And so I went into psychology, and then I didn't get into the doctorates of psychology program, and they offered me marriage and family therapy. So in the middle of that program, I found myself on the brink of divorce. And so I think it was just destiny that got me to this place today, for sure.
Wow, that's a lot of divorce. I grew up in a household where parents were, and don't get me wrong, we had plenty of dysfunction.
Right.
But my parents, before my dad died, they'd been married, I think, 48 years. So,
Wow.
but there was a ton of dysfunction even within that family. So,
Yeah.
so I, as a grown up, I like to say that, I just messed my kids up in a different way than my parents messed me up.
Yes, we all do.
Right? So what prompted you to write a book about this topic?
Well, I wanted to put my life's work in writing, and I wanted to actually impact more people than I knew I could individually. So I know I really am on a mission to help save 10 million marriages. That was my next declaration after declaring I would never get a divorce. And once I saved my marriage, not once, but twice, it really became a life mission to help others to transform the culture of marriage. I feel like is ready for an upgrade. And the best way that I could think of doing it was to write a book and be able to disseminate this message across the world. Yeah.
So one of the things I love about your book is there's so much going on in the world today that is, okay, we've got problems, but it's not my fault. It's all you. And I actually love your book came in the door in December, and then boom, boom, right after 2 more came in about personal responsibility.
Ooh,
Which
okay.
I know, I feel like that's a trend that's going forward and kind of flipping the script. So talk a little bit about that, because I think that is, and I've been through a divorce, I think that's the go-to. Like, you know what, you're bad, you do this, you do that, and I can't change you.
Yeah.
And we never stop and think about how can we change ourselves? And if I change myself, will that dynamic change?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I do think that you're right. The culture up until recently really held on to that victim mentality. And not to say that many of the people I'm speaking about felt like a victim or victimized themselves. It just was a cultural norm to look for the faults in others, to look outside of ourselves for the problem as well as the solution. And we were taught that, if we don't like what's happening, then move on or do something different. And it really translated into get out and get divorced or find someone else, and that person's not right for you, rather than being much more introspective and saying, okay, well, if this is not working and something is, not right, then maybe there's something in me that I can shift in order to influence and impact the relationship. And that's so new, I think, in our society. Although personal development and transformation have been around a while, the translation into relationships has not begun yet. So I want to translate all of those personal development and even spiritual development tools and techniques and teachings into the relationships. And I know that it's not translated well yet because of our results. Our statistics still say that we are greater than 50% divorce rate. And so therefore we know that although we're working on ourselves, it's not quite working in our relationships yet. So I'm not sure if that answers your question.
It does in a sense, but it's just that taking those disempowering beliefs into your own hands, because a lot of times that it's not that that other person needs to change, it's that there are things within you that are being triggered. Yeah. And you will probably agree, being married, that nobody on earth knows how to trigger you better than your spouse.
Oh yeah, they're our greatest trigger and our greatest gift and greatest teacher, but definitely greatest trigger.
Yeah, no, definitely. I just had my ex-husband came to town for Christmas, and the kids were all sick, so he had to stay at my house. And it was actually kind of hilarious because I walked around the house kind of going, oh, God, this is why I divorced you. But it's kind of hard sometimes, because that person will just do those little things that trigger you. And you can, when you step back and you've healed yourself, you kind of see that they haven't changed. And maybe, I don't know, tell us a little bit about that. When you heal yourself, what are you trying to heal?
Well, I like to say that our partner, or even the most challenging relationship in our life, right, is a reflection of a belief that we carry around relationships. And so if, for example, my husband, he was lying to me for 10 years about an addiction behind my back, and it was a really powerful moment when I realized that he was simply reflecting back to me the mistrust that I had in myself inside of my relationships, right? I was told subconsciously, almost this unspoken rule within my family, that men can't be trusted. They're liars, they're cheaters, they're alcoholics, they're addicts. These were all the experiences of my grandmother, my family in general. And that is something that subconsciously got imprinted in me, and then I projected onto my husband. And granted, he was having an addiction problem at the time, it was still lined up so perfectly to my own belief system. And when I started shifting my beliefs about relationships and how I can trust myself within a relationship, no matter how the other person shows up, that's when my marriage began to change. And he began to look within himself for answers too, because I stopped pointing at him and saying, "You're the problem, you're the problem, you're the problem, go fix yourself." And I said, "Whoa, okay, hold on. I have things I can work on. Let me just go focus on me." Well, what he was left with was himself.
Yeah.
He couldn't point the finger back at me and say, "Well, you're nagging and you just think that I'm the problem." And he couldn't blame me anymore. And that was a really powerful moment for both of us, because that's when he started to change as well.
Yeah. And I remember when I was married, that it's so funny. I don't know if I've ever shared this with my audience, but I've always been very professionally driven. And when you're professionally driven as a woman, you're proactive.
Yeah.
When you're at home and you're doing the same things, you're nagging.
Correct. Yes, it can be perceived quite different.
Yeah, exactly. So your book breaks up into 4 different segments. Can you talk a little bit about each segment? And when you're talking about them, do you have to do them in a particular order? How do, like, because you put them in the book and I can kind of see that there is a pattern to where you're going with this.
Yeah, so I think there's two what's the words ways to look at this book. So one, I had broken it up in sections or parts, and it's a 3-part system called the triple A's of transformation. And the A's are awareness, alignment, and action. And so the book is, separated in these different parts where you need to become aware of what's happening, what's going on within you, what's yours and what's theirs, right? The awareness is super key. And then alignment, aligning to your highest self, your best self, your truest self, and showing up that way. And then finally taking action, because the first 2 are nothing without actually solidifying that into form and taking action and in motion, right? So that's one of the processes that I share in that book. But the other one, the 4-part one that I think you're talking about and referencing, is how I help people transform their relationships specifically. And that starts with, the first step is just becoming the best you. Like, take the focus off of everyone else and everything else outside of yourself and look within to transform the relationships within you. And in that first part or step of the 4-part process of transforming your relationships, I introduce a model that I created, which is called Inner Mosaic. And that helps you to better understand all the different parts of yourself and relate and love and trust all those different parts. And once we do that, we can begin the process outside of ourselves. So that's the first step. And then the second one is navigating the storm, because when you change as a change agent, because we all are, and when you are the change in a system, it will cause some disruption. And when that disruption begins, what happens is most people think that that's evidence that it's not working, or thinks that's when most people decide to get the divorce, because they're like, well, they're not changing, they're getting worse. Well, I always say that's the good news, and that's signs of transformation. So that navigating the storm is important, and where I come in most of the time to help people stay on course and stay steady and not give up too soon. The third would be communication, right? So couples communication, or just communication in general, learning to communicate within yourself as well as outside of yourself, right? With the other people in your life, with your spouse. And finally, the last one is the upward spiral. And that is really to share with everyone that the journey is continuous, that we are constantly growing and going up this spiral of life. And that sometimes it looks like we're back to where we started, or why are we back to this problem again, yet again, here we are, right? But it's not the same. We're just up one rung, right? We have grown and expanded ourselves, and we're back again to a similar spot, but one rung up. And I like to say that that's just the process of life. And we have these repeated lessons that show up in our lives, and they just get better and better and easier to deal with and to work through. So those are the 4 steps I believe you were referencing.
Yeah.
And that comes out actually in the last section, the action section of the book.
Yeah, it does. And you guys, when she's talking about disruptions, I mean, I've kind of gone through this process before I met Sam, and you know, the disruptions. I don't know if you ever read Melanie Beattie's book about codependence. Is that thing where there's going to be that hard period where you have changed and other people push back because they don't like that you've
you're
changed.
disrupting homeostasis.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing
Yeah.
to other people, right? Yeah.
Yeah, but and that's a good sign though, because that's the point where you can decide, am I going to stay here or am I going to let that go? And that was actually mine. Once I changed, I had a situation where I changed that communication and just said, hey, you know what? You go do whatever you want to do. You're not going to listen to my input anyway. See you. Bye-bye. Because I was exhausted. And
Yeah.
a month later, they came back and they were like, yeah, what we did didn't work. Can we re-brainstorm this? And it was really a wake-up call for me about, oh, you just changed communication and the whole dynamic. And most of the time it doesn't happen overnight either, right? Yeah,
No.
it's gonna be, yeah.
It takes time, and that's one of the big lessons most of my clients are learning is patience. They're like, I want it to happen now. And I'm like, it will happen sooner if you stop resisting it and stop pushing it to happen, right? So I have seen my clients' marriages transform fairly quickly, but at the same time, it was the moment that they released that that expectation or that desire that the transformation began to happen for them. So it's ironic, right? That the more we want it, the more contracted we become and we strangle it, right? That desire versus just letting it go. Just, I don't know about you, but I've experienced this. Many of my clients experience this. I was like, just let go. And they're like, no, I don't want to let go. Just let go. And the moment they let go, they're like, wow, that worked.
Right? Letting go. See, letting go is hard. I mean, I don't know how many times in my head I'm just like, let this go, let this go. But that's that point where you heal yourself, because as you're saying, let that go, and then it's not letting go. You have to start looking about, why isn't it letting go? Why am I getting angry? What is, you know, nobody's doing anything to me. This is me getting angry because I can't control this, but I can't let it go either. So
exactly. And this has everything to do with trust. And trusting ourselves that it's not going to happen again, and we're not going to let it happen again, right? Anger and resentment is something we hold on to in order to protect ourselves from something happening again, that we felt really discomfort or sadness or anger or hurt. And so it's a defense mechanism. And if we don't learn to trust ourselves that we can navigate any challenge that shows up for us in our relationships in life, then that's when we will continue to hold on to and not be able to let go of, right? So the whole process, as I shared, the Inner Mosaic method, is to help you learn to trust and love all parts of yourself. And in that, you can navigate almost anything, right? Like whenever something shows up, you can check in with yourself and support yourself. And I always tell my clients, it's funny, but I'm like, well, so some of my clients, their spouses are in their addiction, and so and other clients, they have, you know, infidelity or affairs or have stepped out. And I said, they're so worried about it happening again. And I said, you can't prevent it happening again. The likelihood of you stopping it again is zero, like pretty much at zero, right? Like
Right.
if they really want to go do something, they will do it. They will execute that. And on top of that, the more you focus on it, the more self-fulfilling prophecy you will have. But what I tell them is that let's get you to a place that if the worst case scenario were to happen, if they were to cheat on you again, if they were to relapse in their addiction, that you have so much trust and faith in yourself that you will be able to handle it in that moment. You'll know confidently that this isn't you, that you're not the crazy one, that you're showing up as your best self, that things are not the same as before. And that's exactly what happened. Like really quickly, that's exactly what happened to me. So the first time we were on the brink of divorce in my own marriage, I found out about my husband's addiction and 10 years of lies. I was just so shattered and stopped trusting all parts of myself. I just questioned and doubted my ability to read people, like everything, right? And so I worked on myself and worked on myself and worked on myself to a place where I started to love and trust all parts of myself. And then it happened again. My husband began to relapse and he went into a deep depression, and he was pointing the finger at me saying, I don't want to be with you. I don't love you anymore. I want more freedom. You're being really controlling. And I got to pause in that moment and check in with myself. And I said, okay, yeah, there's some tweaks that I can make. You're right. There are some things I can own. And this is the best version of me that I've ever been in. And so I know that I'm showing up as the best me. And I trust that everything that I have been doing recently was not that person, right? That you are still seeing and you're still blaming. And that was a powerful moment because all I was doing at that point was shining the mirror back on at him and showing him that no, it wasn't me that's crazy. It wasn't me that's naggy. It wasn't me that's really the problem anymore. And that was a powerful moment. And within 6 months, my husband was able to turn that around and get the help he needed and really get back on track and reignite our marriage. And that was a really powerful moment to be able to put all of these principles into practice in my own relationship, not once, but twice. Right. So yeah.
That's great. So just because I want to be really transparent with people on here, your book is When the Marriage Can Be Saved. There are always situations where you're not going to be able to implement.
Of course.
Yeah. So what are some of those warning signs that, you know, this may not be a healthy place to stay?
Yeah. So I definitely don't condone staying in an abusive relationship, whether that's physically, mentally, right? Any of those abuse signs. So if granted, I have to say that there were many moments because of my husband's addiction that I felt really gaslighted or gaslit.
Yeah.
I don't know what the right term in that tense is, but right, like gaslighting became like a whole fad not too long ago, a whole thing. But
Yeah.
So it really does take some professional help to determine sometimes if you're in an abusive relationship, because gaslighting is a sign of abuse, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily, I wasn't in an abusive relationship, even though I felt like I was being gaslit, right? And so physical abuse is very clear cut. If you're being hit, if there's any physical violence, meaning you're not getting hit, but there's objects being thrown in your home. Once very, very, very early on in our relationship, my husband decided to punch a door because he was mad at me. And that was the first and last time he's ever done that, because I taught him in that moment, that's physical abuse. That's
Right.
violence because you wanted that door to be my face. So that's not okay, right? So that's also a sign of physical violence and abuse. But there are so many, and I want to speak on when I help my clients through their relationship challenges, there are two outcomes. Not always is the outcome staying together. That is the goal for my clients. They do want it to work, but sometimes it doesn't. And because when I share this, I talk about open systems, and the best example of an open system is an ecosystem. And so when you change one part of an ecosystem, such as an extinction or an evolution, and the rest of the system must and will accommodate to that change in order to maintain the system. And if it doesn't, if the rest of the system cannot rise up to the occasion, the ecosystem, the system itself, will come to a natural completion. And that's sometimes what happens in relationships. So not all relationships are meant to be forevermore. But again, when we were talking about showing up as the best version of yourself, I said to myself, I'm going to be the best version of me. And if my marriage ends because of that, or if my marriage ends after that, then I know I did my best, and that all I could do in my marriage. And so you can sleep well at night saying, I did everything, right? And I know it's complete. It's not this anger or resentment or bitterness in this separation. It's this loving release of, I set you free because I know I did all I could do. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to leave you in anger. And that is a really powerful way to complete a relationship. I like to say complete instead of end or divorce, but it's a really powerful way to complete a relationship. And many times that can be the result of this, right? And for you completed a marriage and you learned what you needed to, and you moved on to the next, right? And that's for others, that's the same as well.
Yeah, well, that was really powerful. So you guys, Finding Beauty in Your Broken Pieces will be available on February 13th. And if you like book clubs, I mentioned in the intro, we have Breakthrough Authors with an S, bookclub.com. And Samantha's book is going to be the featured book from February 15th until the end of February. And what a perfect time, Valentine's Day, and moving into the spring with love and transformation and change as well, if things aren't going as well as you like. So Sam, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, Juliet.